when these types of topics show up in The Economist, they are deemed sort of worthy of the attention of the broader business community. And so I think a lot of the issues that came up on the first panel had to do with economics, productivity, certainly sort of labor and those types of issues that are, I think, very hard business issues. One of the things that I've found fascinating every time we find a community, people online working together to do everything from building new businesses to building cars, is there's a very particular role called community management. And most people's response to that is usually, okay, so what political party are you organizing for? And so I'm excited to introduce our next panel, who are all people who do something that is more or less community management, and I'll let them explain what that is. Sorry, no music.
I know, it's going to run out, like high five people. Do one of these.
Oh, we changed it.
Thanks for the intro, Sean. Can everyone hear me okay? I didn't actually hear the intro, but I'm assuming it was highly complimentary, and I'm blushing. Cool, so just a couple words before we really dive into things. The panel's listed as an hour and 15 minutes long. We're going to do you the favor and not take that time. So we'll probably talk up here for about 45 minutes or so and then open it up to questions. Because no matter how cool everyone is, you can get bored. And the second bit is we're going to try to focus on being as practical as we can about this stuff. I mean, you know, I think you probably wouldn't be here if you didn't already kind of believe in it. We expect that you guys are pretty familiar with theory and potential, so we're going to try to, at least I'm going to do my best to squeeze as much as I can out of these guys because they know what they're talking about. So I'm Saneel, I'm moderating. I run the innovation unit of BBH called BBH Labs, and I'm going to let these guys introduce themselves.
Sure.
My
name is Matthew Brimer. I am the co-founder of General Assembly, which is a educational campus and community focused on technology, design, and entrepreneurship here in New York.
Well, hi, I'm Paulo Schiavon. I'm the online and social media manager for TECNISA, one of the major real estate companies in Brazil.
My name is Toby Daniels. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Crowdcentric, also the founder and executive director of Social Media Week.
I'm Alex. I'm the engineering community manager for Locomotors, and we basically do open source cars and open source automotive development.
My name is Ali, and I have two companies. One is 7 years old, and the other one is 7 months old. I speak about them as if they were children. I have She Says. The URL is shessays.com, which is kind of more educational kind of enterprise for kind of women in digital and women creative. And I also have something called I Shout. The URL is Everybody Shout, and it's for, you know, it's based on crowdsourcing principles, but it's for women to reply to kind of client briefs from brands that want to target women. But men in the audience, I don't hate you guys. No one in my community does. The community is only it's mostly women only, but that doesn't mean that we hate men. Okay, guys.
I feel relieved suddenly. So the title of the panel is Building and Working with Communities. So actually, Ali, I'm going to start with you. And for the rest of the panel, I'm going to call you Ale, as I've now learned, to show how legit I am. Do you want to just tell everyone a little bit about your experience building communities, since you have two?
Yes, I think you know, what worked really well for She Says, for example, is you know, I think we weren't afraid of starting really small and kind of bootlegging it. And I think that's, and I think the main thing that makes a community really big is actually having a real unmet need for that community. And our community grew, like every time we had an event, every month, you know, 50 more people would show up. That because it just because there was a real need for it, and then it got bigger. So I think experience number one is like how we build it. It's just kind of, we built it out of a need, you know, and we let it grow organically. And I think that kind of really helped. And I'm trying to do the same thing with the second community.
Cool. And Matthew, you're kind of on the flip side of this. I mean, it's called actually technically online communities. Yours is potentially that, but could you just tell the group a little bit about General Assembly?
Sure. General Assembly is a physical place. It's a 20,000 square foot campus at 20th and Broadway. we basically took over this big loft in a building, which is a completely empty box, white walls, columns, and there was it. No walls, no, it wasn't even a floor. And we built it out into our own sort of custom design campus with classrooms, seminar rooms, library, kitchen, lounge area, event space, co-working space. And with all that, we opened about just over a year ago, a year and a month. We have a community of early stage entrepreneurs and startups which we've curated and sort of handpicked. There's a selection application process. And those startups and entrepreneurs are residents at General Assembly. They pay a monthly membership fee. There are members. We might have them in to teach classes. All of our educational programs are taught by practitioners. And so that community forms a good sort of foundation and base of instructors and subject matter experts who we can then pull into the classroom and teach their skills to a wider, more public audience.
And when you say hand-selected, because that's a luxury I think a lot of community managers don't actually have. How did you decide who was kind of invited into the community? I mean, did you have predefined roles in your head about what they should be doing, or you just thought these are interesting people, or how did that happen?
So one of the things that we sort of considered early on is how we want to think about community and just sort of perspective when we were starting General Assembly. So on the one hand, if you just have a community that is entirely closed and is entirely selective and there's no sort of way for like outsiders to get in, you run the risk of being some sort of exclusive club that has certain connotations. At the same time, going the other end of the spectrum, if you're completely open, there's no curation, there's no selectivity, there's no focus, you run the risk of the quality of the engagements and the community and the interaction of just going down to zero, right? If you look at like YouTube comments, for example, completely uncurated and just worthless, right? But on the other hand, you look at other forums, other online communities, probably a lot of people here, and the engagement is incredible to the point where you can actually create entire business out of it. And so we wanted to sort of balance those. So on the one hand, we were seeking sort of high potential, scalable early stage startups whose founders really cared about sharing, interacting, being a part of a greater community. We had some entrepreneurs approach us and they say, well, they want to be a part of General Assembly, but they're in stealth mode and they can't talk to anyone. And those people are just not a good fit, right? You don't want to be in stealth mode and not be able to interact. We wanted people who were very interested in not just getting from the community, but really adding to it and giving it to it, whether in the form of just sort of being useful, having those sort of serendipitous interactions, bumping into people, potentially teaching, potentially writing blog posts, potentially hosting events or whatnot. So we're looking for those kind of people. And then on the other end, we also wanted to balance that very curated, very selective piece by having all of our classes and events and workshops and educational programs be open to the public. And that's a big part of General Assembly now. And at this point, we have about 3,000 to 4,000 people coming in every single month into campus to take classes, attend events, do workshops and stuff. But only about 300 or so people are members and actually working out of the space. So at this point, the sort of broader community is bigger than the selective piece. But I think having a very strong core at the end of the day, when you're building and growing a community, is incredibly vital. It's having the right early adopters, the right core people, I think determines like the early DNA that then becomes something bigger.
So I have a bit of a confession actually for all the panelists, which is I don't actually know what community management is. I come from an agency background, so like we give each other awards for responding to like Facebook posts. It's like, oh, that was cool. You did that. Look at that brand, be nimble. So I'd love to just kind of ask you guys what the hell community management actually means. I'm looking at you, Toby, because you're nodding most vigorously. Will you give us a sense?
I'm nodding vigorously because I think you guys really are awesome at that.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. Yeah. No, tell us a little bit about what community management is.
It's an incredibly difficult kind of question to answer in the sense that it's changing so much at the moment. The definition, the requirements of a strong community manager. I think the first thing I want to do is just dispel a few myths. Community management is not the domain of the most junior people within the organization. Community management is absolutely not something that you kind of just give to an individual and hope that they can sort of maintain and manage communications online or through whatever sort of social media channel they happen to be interacting in. Community management is, I think, one of the most important emerging new disciplines that's going to fundamentally and radically change the way that we do business. And as the sort of CEO of the company and as the executive director of Social Media Week, I consider myself a community manager. You know, and I take that job and the responsibility of community management incredibly seriously. I am invested every single day in interactions with the community in a way that is very specific and germane to what I do and the role that I perform, but it's still community management nonetheless. And so I think that what it is something that's starting to infiltrate all disciplines within an organization. It's starting to break down silos within the internal makeup of an organization, and it's becoming the most important external communication channel for a startup or for a major corporation. And I think that we shouldn't underestimate the importance of community management as we move forward and think about how do we reorganize ourselves around what's happening in social media and social communications.
So just so I'm clear, when you say the most important channel for that type of outreach, I mean, are you saying even compared to, let's say, formalized like purchase media and whatnot for these big companies, you feel like, you know, through the community, actually that is a more valuable touch point potentially for these big companies?
I certainly want to avoid talking about channels in a sort of siloed sense. That's not kind of what I mean, because I think businesses have multiple channels that come out of all sort of aspects of the organization. I think that I guess what I'm referring to is just the requirement or the need for people to understand that this is a skill set that needs to be adopted by, let's say, people in HR and people in product design and people in marketing or customer service. And this skill set is, I think, universally applicable across every sort of vertical or silo within a business, because ultimately the best community managers are the ones that understand how to connect and communicate. It's not just about pushing out messaging, it's really about listening to what people are talking about. It's about making connections or bridging connections. It's about knowing when to pull someone into a conversation and when to ask them to leave. And I think these skills, which we're just starting to kind of understand right now, are skills that need to be learned by everybody.
And do you guys feel, I mean, is the collective sense on the panel that big companies value that as a skill, like they see that as something that they need to keep track of at a very senior level, like the C-suite of big companies? I mean, Paulo, you work at a very big company, one that isn't built around a community per se, but you've certainly brought a community into it. Do you want to just tell these people a little bit about just kind of how that's worked and if you think that's valued?
Actually, yeah, TECNISA is quite a big company. It's a local company. It has business in 22 different cities in Brazil, but it's only in Brazil. So we're trying to push forward some initiatives related to virtual communities in our marketing and product development strategies so far. And I would say that we have three ways of engaging communities inside the company in this moment. We built open innovation platform called TECNISA Ideas a few months ago, where we start, like we have already more than 1,000 ideas published from customers to where we can find some insights of how to improve our products and the way we do business in Brazil.
So how to improve the actual buildings that you're building? Those ideas are coming from customers.
Yeah, that's the idea. Actually, we don't have the whole picture from that community. Usually we have just insights that can somehow initiate a conversation inside the company about trends, what trends these customers are showing us. And so from that ideas, we can start to implement modifications in our product development so we can achieve in a better way our customers through our products. That's the way we are doing. And also we have a very strong way of innovating with suppliers for the company. We call that process fast dating. It's very
fast dating.
Fast dating, yeah, is very close to speed dating to meet people. But we do in a different way in Brazil.
Now Toby's nodding vigorously.
Is fast dating faster or slower than speed dating?
I try to be faster, I guess. But the main thing is we try to put startups and entrepreneurs into contact with our company as much as we can, so we can find out big opportunities that are not being used by other competitors in our country. So it's a very nice way to somehow speed things to find new opportunities in the market.
Yeah, you know, and Alex, you're on the exact opposite end of that, right? So as these guys are looking at communities for new ideas or kind of optimization, I mean, what the community does is core to Local Motors as a company, right? I mean, Local Motors is not a company without a community, and you're the head of that community. So can you talk a little bit about like how you would then define community management at a company like Local Motors?
Well, I mean, I guess for Local Motors, community management in any sense is really defined by the community itself as a resource, and so community management of that resource is really dictated by what it's doing for you, and that it may be a resource for the company, it may be a resource for the community itself, you know. But for Local Motors, really what it's about is Local Motors. We do our development, and we encourage the development of our community's projects through basically the passion that we all share, which is, you know, the automotive world. And so trying to manage that community is really about trying to essentially keep people feeling, or keep people engaged with what brought them into that passion in the first place. Try to take the passion that they were all experiencing, you know, in a decentralized fashion, and bring it all into one place where it can all manifest in one place. And then also trying to, you know, provide the right, you know, go out to the community, figure out what kind of tools they need, figure out what their pain points are, and then bring them the resources that they would need to enable them to continue on with following that passion, following that focus, that type of thing.
Mm-hmm.
I see you nodding over there.
Yeah, I mean, I think what Toby said just made me think, you know, because you're saying, oh, community managers are not, you know, just the most junior person, and I think they are super important. And I'm actually wondering, and you said I'm a community manager in a way, and I was thinking I am a community manager in a way too, and I'm also the CEO of a company. So I was kind of thinking whether being a CEO is all about being a community manager. Just made me think that. And I think the decentralization is really important from what you're saying to make a community really healthy. You know, the way that She Says works, She Says exists in 17 countries, and every single country where She Says exists is totally autonomous. We don't dictate what each chapter should do, and I think decentralization is really important. And it's a little bit about why the Alcoholics Anonymous is so famous, because each chapter administers itself. There is no one single centralized kind of person, you know, dictating on what they do, and I think it's really important. And just to kind of backtrack a little bit, because I didn't answer your first question well, a little story. She Says started in 2007 with, you know, women just helping each other, having monthly events. We also do courses, and it's very educational. And then with Shout, we were thinking, what can we do with like all these smart women in advertising around the world? You know, that is not just educational. So we just created Everybody Shout, which is like a kind of a platform based on crowdsource principles, where clients put their briefs up, and the women will work and reply to their brief in their own time with whoever they want. They can choose to work together or not. They can choose to meet physically or not. And that's kind of basically, you know, I think what's interesting about the two communities is that one feeds the other. If one is more educational, the educational part feeds the kind of more working and business part, and then they get better in what they do, you know, and then they get educated and they do better work on the platform. So I kind of think it's really interesting, this kind of, you know, having an educational community that feeds a working community, which is a little bit of what General Assembly is doing as well, you know, having the educational part and like the working part.
And so maybe management is the wrong term for it. It's more like you're a community enabler. You figure out, you know, you're trying to figure out, you know, you're not actually managing the community itself. You're figuring out what are the drivers for that community, and you're just trying to do everything in your power to, you know, break down the walls that actually get in the way of that driver, you know, going to its full potential and letting the community, like you said earlier, grow organically and behave organically.
I also think it's a little bit like building a house. I mean, you know, there are multiple disciplines required to get to that kind of end product where all the bricks are in place, the windows are in, the lawn is like laid, etc. And it requires, you know, it's a process, it's a methodology that requires design and architecture to build. But it requires a whole different set of skills to maintain and to moving away from the house analogy, because of course houses don't necessarily grow, but you know, to grow and develop and nurture the community over time is a very different set of skills. And I think you're probably right. Community management suggests somehow that it's the domain of an individual or even the domain of a department, and that's wrong, because it shouldn't be. It's a process and an ongoing and continuous one.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, that getting it, like building the house is different than maintaining the house, just in terms of skills, right? So if you're a big company, and you know, more and more this stuff's getting attention, right? I mean, people are like, okay, they look at companies like Local Motors and go, that sounds really complicated, and somehow a community is designing and engineering their cars. I mean, that as a sentence seems very difficult to achieve. So how do you, if you're a company or a person within an organization, how do you learn that skill? Like, what is it that, I mean, you know, I think there is a reason that a lot of junior people end up with these jobs. A, it's not valued by the company enough, but B, oh, that kid's on Facebook, cool. Yeah. You know, that sounds like community management, yeah. You know.
I mean, I think going back to the house analogy for a second, how do you build a house like one brick at a time, right? Yeah. That's the first thing that people need to understand, that this stuff doesn't just magically kind of happen. It's really hard work, yeah. And it requires a lot of painstaking kind of effort to continue to lay brick upon brick. And it's only when you look back at a completed house you think, wow, you know, that's pretty amazing. And if someone comes in from the outside and looks at it, like, how the hell did you do that? And it needs to be deconstructed, right, to really understand how these things work, right? So Social Media Week in 3 years has grown to about 24 cities around the world. We'll probably do about 60,000 physical attendees over the course of this year. In each individual city, you have like a little bit like she says in many ways, you have a localized kind of component to the local community. So you have a core company, you have an advisory group that sort of works on the periphery of that company. You then have a circle of social like influencers who collaborate and connect and work. Then you have the event partners. Then you have the broader community, right? So it's like layer upon layer of people that are working together to make something happen, times 24. Sure. To get to that point where we're in all of those different cities, all those different things happening, you have to start from one city, and you have to architect that structure and then replicate. And that's how you grow a community. It's not like this thing, it's not like this big amorphous thing that just like magically appears. Mm-hmm. It needs to be designed, it needs to be architected.
And you see that as your job to hand over the template to the other cities?
You know, absolutely. You know, first of all, you can't do any of this without creating frictionless paths for participation. People need to be able to you know, get involved and collaborate and whatever, you know, participate in really frictionless ways. And so as soon as you start putting up barriers, people will just like, okay, this is not going to work for me. But yeah, it's really about putting in place the architecture, giving people the tools, the resources, and the ongoing support, motivation, encouragement. And then from our perspective, what we're trying to do is figure out those like levers, the sort of the incentive levers. How do we, where something's not working, how do we like adjust those levers so that people feel empowered or motivated or inspired to do what we're sort of encouraging them to do? And that's, you know, we'll probably talk a lot more about this, but that's probably the most difficult aspect.
Yeah.
Yeah. How you motivate a community, yeah.
Empowering them is really important, and how to do that, you know, it's not.
Right. And I think empowering is a good word here, because it's about the more that you can empower the members of the community to support and engage and help you manage and improve the community. I think that's like the meta level of community management, right? Yeah. It's not just one person or the senior management or whatnot, but it's those people helping to inspire and empower other people to make something better.
And then it happens organically again, just because I love to interrupt. Because, for example, we have a community manager on Shout, and she's essential to kind of bridge the gap between, you know, for example, what the client is asking for and what the women are doing on the platform. But also what we're trying to create is actually pro users in a way, like women that already been working on the platform really well and understand it to help the people that are starting. So like, like processes and things like Toby was talking a little bit about, like as soon as people start understanding how it works in the community, then maybe users teach users, on how that community works. And I think that's really interesting.
So in your case, you guys have a shared goal, right? So I can see how across Social Media Week, Local Motors, and Shout to some degree, like there's at least a sense of community, like you're all part of something and there's a shared goal, right? General Assembly, there's maybe shared beliefs or passions, but there isn't like something to be achieved in some way, right, as a group of people that are there. How does that change how people are motivated, or at least like kind of how when you talk about empowering people, how does that work as a community when there isn't kind of a clear, this is the goal that we are trying to achieve and we've arrived?
Sure. Yes, I think you're right that the General Assembly community all is not aiming toward one goal. Actually, they're aiming all toward lots of different goals, personal goals, professional goals. I mean, it's a General Assembly is sort of a meta startup in the sense that it is a collection, at least on the membership, resident community side. It's a collection of all of these startups and entrepreneurs. We have like 100 different individual companies who work out of General Assembly or part of the General Assembly community. And it's not even counting the education side. So they're all working on different things. I think at the end of the day, it's a shared set of beliefs. And at the end of at the very core, I think one of the very important things about it is that there's this camaraderie. And that's that it's very emotional at the end of the day. It's this shared camaraderie, knowing that as an entrepreneur, especially as someone who's an entrepreneur building a digital product or doing something sort of internet-based, you really could be anywhere in terms of your specific location where you work. You're working out of a coffee shop, working out of your apartment. All you need is a laptop, in this sort of day and age to build a product and build a company. You don't even have to be with your colleagues. You can work remotely. And yet, General Assembly is always filled. I mean, it's always filled with people who are packed together on the couch and talking. And it's this idea that you don't have to be alone, right? Even if you're just sort of fighting and you're 1 or 2 or 5 people trying to build this company and get something off the ground and deal with failures and mistakes along the way, it's nice to know that there are other people who are having similar experiences, who are in the same boat as you are. And while you're all driving toward your own goals, you know that you have that bond, and you know that you can help each other, and that other people can be useful and helpful to you, even if it's just like a sort of emotional support thing. It could also manifest itself maybe more tangibly or more higher level in the form of, people around you might be able to provide feedback. They might be able to make introductions. They might be able to help you. Everyone can help each other achieve their own goals, and it's that network effect that comes into play where everyone is benefited by having lots of other people around them who can help each other.
Yeah, that shared experience is just really important. I mean, Local Motors started out as a company where we were very focused on our Local Motors branded vehicles and whatnot. And we've had a huge shift recently where we're pulling away from focusing on our company's vehicles and going into, well, what are the vehicles and basically the automotive or vehicular inventions that other people want to do, and how do we make it so that they can do that? And I mean, this idea of having that, this idea of not being alone is core to that. We have a number of projects that are going on in our community right now that are development projects, and it's always the same story of, well, my background is X, and I'm this far in my project, but I need that last bit of insight from somebody who really knows what they're doing in this discipline that's completely foreign to me. And where would I find this? Now they have this community where, through this shared passion of this one industry or this one pastime, they all have a common ground, even coming from separate disciplines, to get together and start helping each other out. And furthermore, we even have the situation going on that you mentioned, where you might have 2 people who are in the same stage of development with a vehicle. I have an EV over here that I'm trying to get going. I have a super efficient you know, ICE vehicle that I'm trying to invent, and this is core to my business. And you know, they can collaborate with each other and figure out what were their difficulties in terms of getting funding, or aggregating designers to do their aesthetics, or figuring out where to get these things produced. You know, it all circles back to, there's a reason why you call it community, because it's the aggregation of all of these people that that are so different and yet share that one unifying, you know, driver. So
I just want to disagree with your first point about shared goals. I'm not sure I really believe that a community kind of shares the same goal. To your point, absolutely think they share values or philosophies or whatever you want to call it. And I think it's important that those are clear to people as they join and become part of a community, but not share goals. I actually want to make a t-shirt that says, like, I'm part of a community, yet I look after number one. Because the reality is individuals care about themselves, their needs, their goals, and will gravitate towards something that I think helps them achieve that. But from a very sort of individual perspective. And people generally are not that community spirited or not that community minded. It's actually...
It's a tool for them to get where they want.
And I don't see that as a bad thing. Our job is to understand, you know, how to bring these people together and solve multiple problems and help people achieve multiple goals.
That makes sense.
Because looking out for number one for two individuals could be parallel. The reason why it's not a bad thing, I mean, you could have a situation where you have somebody who is, you know, in a particular discipline, or they have a particular background or that sort of thing, and they are willing to contribute to somebody else's project because they want to access that fame or access that recognition or get that compensation or whatnot. Yeah, they're looking out for number one, but the point is, at the end of the day, once they've made that contribution, the receiver of that contribution, the guy who was the person who threw up the flag for help or whatever the mechanism is, you know, they also are that much further down the road to their goals. In some cases, they've just, you know, traversed a distance that they would have had no way of doing it previously unless they had made that connection with this other self-interested individual, you know what I mean? So,
but clearly you guys don't just say, okay, everyone's looking out for number one, Ayn Rand was right, just let that shit happen. I mean, you guys have decided to take certain things inside the organization that you resolve versus you kind of let the community resolve, right? And Toby, you said a kind of a passing comment over lunch that I think gets to the heart of this, which is like, well, voting obviously isn't the best way to get something out of community. Yet voting might be the most common, you know, tool I see applied in communities all the time because it feels democratic or something in some way. How do you decide, I mean, across any of your organizations, how do you decide this is something we decide, you guys leave us to it for a second, versus, okay, this is for the group to decide, these people are all pulling in their own direction, but we're going to let it play out? Like, what?
Whose head is on the chopping block generally is something that seems to be communicated very easily to people. I think the voting seems to translate well because, like you said, it's got a diplomatic feel to it. So the community sort of accepts this and they receive it pretty happily. But we were just beginning to work on the engineering facet of our community. And so we were running some very sort of small, controlled engineering products or engineering development projects for our internal car as a way to get the community involved in doing engineering projects with each other. And one of the things that we found was, despite the fact that previously local motors had totally been known for this mechanism of at the end of the development process, the community votes, and that's how we determine our outcome, we just took a stand and we said, there isn't going to be voting. Basically, local motors is going to be picking we're going to be picking the solution and choosing the attributes that we acquire from our solution providers or our community participants. And the engineers who were participating in this, or the designers or the backyard fabricators that were participating in this, accepted this because they understood this relation of it was going on our product. So at the end of the day, we were the ones who were going to have to, take ownership of the idea, be responsible for the performance of the idea. And I think it's important that that to see that there are a number of other dynamics that are a number of other choice dynamics that a community can understand just simply because they're used to those relations other than voting.
Yeah, we have voting associated with commenting as well, but in terms of like, because with us what we're doing is basically outputting work that is either on the creative or advertising arena, you know, for us it's kind of interesting to see how that completely reverse the creative processes because before, if you think advertising or even if you're in a design agency, there's always like a creative head lead that chooses what is good and what's not. On the public briefs on the platform, we're kind of thinking of a new way of working, which is like, what if there is no creative director? Which totally freaks out all of us in advertising. Like every time when I'm on an advertising panel, this kind of mentality of like, who decides? Who is the creative director? And I say, sometimes no one. You know, they all freak out.
Right.
Like as if the world is going to end.
And the audience is nodding his head somewhere.
But with us, you know, if the client chooses that it's going to be public and it's going to be by voting, it's going to be completely democratic, so be it.
Yeah.
But like General Assembly, we also have a curated team that we work on a private layer. And if the client so decides, we'll curate. So there is actually both. So it can be totally open, democratic voting and commenting, or it could be like a curated thing where we pick.
And I'm sorry, I'm going to be dense here for a second, because it feels like for Paulo and yourself, that's potentially different, because to your point about everyone's looking out for number one, Toby, you guys are more in a challenge-based environment, right? I mean, when someone wins, everyone else loses, right?
No, with us.
Sometimes.
Oh, there isn't, no. So can you guys just elaborate on that?
Actually, I understand that for a major company like TECNISA, a large company, it's very important to have curators inside the company to somehow understand what we are getting from the community and to choose what path we will follow to get things done. Sometimes we launch challenges and we launch specific challenges for the community, but the most we get from that community is insights that will be curated by our professionals, and if we understand that there is opportunity over there, we push forward again through the community that subject and try to get more ideas and more opportunities from it in order to get something done for our project. So I understand that not always, for a large company, a community usually just give insights. They don't give the solution.
I see.
It's different when you talk about like a service community where things can be done online. In our case, it's a very professional
they can't make their own building.
Solution. Yeah, we can make it available online. So we have to have people across the company engaged in that subject, curating their ideas and seeing what is really an opportunity for the company.
Yeah, so with us, we kind of, you know, this is why I'm not saying it's crowdsourcing, because crowdsourcing is like that, you know, one person wins or two and everybody else loses. And we thought really hard and to make part of our business model to basically reward everybody on the platform. So what we did is basically every person who participates, comments, votes, has a little pointing system associated to them. And it's part of our model that if the client or the community doesn't pick their idea, you know, if they have a big, like let's say 1 point equals $1, if they have 100 points, they will get $100 in the end of the year just for participating. So it's part of our model that we're going to reward people that just for participating, it doesn't matter if their idea gets picked or not.
That's a really healthy thing to do too, because one of the reasons that, there's this whole idea about how much can you really do with a community in terms of the quality that you can produce with it, and one of the reasons why this question of quality comes up sometimes is because people are looking out for number one. So how do they look out for number one? There are a couple ways that can happen. On the one hand, it can be, well, I want to see my own personal idea flourish. Yeah, I'm on a larger project, but I have my little brainchild, and my biggest driver is I want to see this brainchild, you know, be enacted on this particular project. And what happens when you create dynamics like you guys have, where you have people winning, you have people winning even when their brainchild doesn't necessarily come to fruition, is it starts getting people focused on success being defined as the success of the project, rather than success for themselves being, now the association is, man, I just want to be more associated with this project and I want it to go as well as possible because then I'm going to brag about being on that project, as opposed to, I have nothing and no stake in this unless my widget gets on that thing and is produced, and now I can point to that single piece and yeah, that was me, you know?
Yeah.
I think a really interesting idea to bring up at this point is this idea of karma, which is something that can be incredibly powerful in communities. And it's this idea that I, as a member of a community, I can actually further my own self-interest by being useful and helping other people in the community. And if you can create those sorts of structures and allow that sort of thing to happen in your community, then everybody, then like it's this sort of rising tide situation where everyone will be better off by being active and participating in the community than if you were just on your own. And so a good example of that is, let's say I make an introduction to someone. I introduce two people. At worst, no one gets any value from that. Nothing happens, the introduction is not right, great, basically net zero loss. But at best, ideally one or ideally both of the people that I introduce will both gain value by having connected, right? Let's say it's a startup who's looking for a mobile developer. Connect your dots, they hire the person, everybody wins. And it actually even reflects well upon me. So I get a little bit of sort of cred from having connected those two people. But at the very least, I don't lose anything, right? By creating value and by giving value to one or possibly two other people, they increase in their value, but I don't actually lose anything. Now, the more that I do that in a community, the more that I just give value without actually losing any value myself, the more likely it is that value will eventually make it back to me in the form of other people making introductions to me, other people connecting me, with other people that are going to be more relevant to me, other people being useful. And so the more that I can do that, the higher likelihood it is that karma will come back. And I think that's in a really thriving community, that karma concept is all over the place, especially with repeated interactions.
So. And I'm interested to know how you guys sort of implement this, and I know the notion of karma exists on a number of these different sort of platforms that have communities that are required to make some sort of contribution. Karma really only works, in my opinion, if the person that is connecting those two dots is doing so selflessly and is not consciously expecting anything in return. Because really, karma only comes back to those, theoretically, of course, to those people that just do this because it's the right thing to do, not because there's something in it for me. Yes. And what I worry is that we start to build in karma, the feature of karma, into these different platforms, into these communities, where it's a badge. You know, I've got 19 karma points, right, or whatever it might be. Right. And whilst that might be motivating, it's slightly misleading, because I'm not sure that it's in the spirit of karma.
And it may just dampen the quality of what, then are you just making noise for the sake of making
noise? Yeah, potentially. And to take nothing away from the example you gave, because it's exactly right.
We actually thought about having, early on, we're creating General Assembly, thought about having some sort of karma point system where if you introduced a new potential member, or you taught a class, or you made an introduction, or you hosted happy hour or something, whatever it was, that you could increase points and you could spend those points in like non-financial situations. But we decided not to do that because of this very point, because once you start to, I think it's this idea of like routinizing social capital and sort of this almost like intangible idea of karma. Once you routinize it into an economic transaction, the economics change, right? So with social capital, I can make an introduction between two people, and as I said, I do not lose anything. Right. I'm not giving you $1 and you gain $1. I'm losing nothing, other two people gain. But once you routinize it into like a more traditional economic model, then I think you lose the magic that can come out of that idea.
Saneel and I were chatting the other day, and BBH has participated in Social Media Week for a number of years now, and in New York, they really sort of threw themselves at the opportunity to create value for the community, host events, spearhead events, curate events, have like as many different employees throughout the city participating. And the value that was created for BBH is almost impossible to measure. I mean, it would be so complex to try and figure out all of those individual contributions and what it ultimately means, but it's inherent. Like, I hope it's inherent. It certainly was from our conversation that for BBH, the reason why you guys were so motivated to get involved is because you get so much back. And that, for me, is inspiring. That inspires me to continue to try and develop a better and more efficient infrastructure that makes that as frictionless as possible.
And yet the other board members of BBH have asked me to quantify that value. So we do get an answer.
Well, I don't know what you mean quantify. You didn't spend any money with it. So, spend some money with us next time and we'll help you quantify.
Actually, could the rest of you excuse us? Toby and I would like to arm wrestle now. So I do want to just, where are we on time? Do we still have a little, okay. Because there's no way communities are good at everything, right? Communities have to suck at stuff. So I would love to hear, and this is kind of open-ended, like what are the limits of what is even reasonable to think a community can do? Or do you guys sincerely believe that there's a set of processes or a set of a type of empowerment, et cetera, that can solve anything?
I think one of the biggest things where, and I don't necessarily want to say that communities will always suck at this, but currently the big trouble that you have is just the same thing that drives the community to be so productive, which is their collective enthusiasm, passion, disciplines, interests, skills, all that stuff is the same thing that can totally mire them if they have to take on too much of the management of an effort. So, you have this huge group of people, this massive horsepower of skill and whatnot, but they still all, if left to their own devices, will choose a very individual way to go and investigate and throw their energy at. And that's the same mechanism, again, it's the same mechanism which makes them so valuable. Mm-hmm. But that, if there's no project management or direction or something like that, you can easily have groups that will spin off, and all of that energy or that potential innovative energy will just go in useful directions, but not, they won't be valuable because they won't be in parallel with each other.
Yeah. So you guys have actually made a car with the community, right? And yet there are all sorts of online communities trying to make cars together all the time outside of local motors. I haven't seen another example work, right? Is that the reason? Is it that because by signing up for this particular community, you're bringing that to the table, or what's the difference? Why do these self-organizing groups not make cars?
I think it's probably one of the major differences. You see a ton of examples of cars out there that are either open source projects, or they are especially green vehicles, or all of these vehicles that are oriented around these hyped topics currently. And so you get a huge swell of enthusiasm for people coming to participate in these projects, and you get some really, really impressive individuals coming in and wanting to contribute to that. But the problem is that you get these groups of individuals in there, and they are so diverse that they all are ready to work on their one focus, and they just get started with it and they line out. And in the beginning it looks great because so much is happening at once, but before long you realize that like building the house, you have to start, you have to lay the foundation and build up from there. And what is ending up happening is somebody's trying to start doing the roofing and whatnot before the guy comes in to do the walls, and one of the things that we found, and granted with the car that we produce right now, the Rally Fighter, it wasn't, we've already sort of passed the level to which we enacted this on that project, but definitely there was this sense of, now we're going to set the tempo. Now we're going to work on X system, or now we're going to focus on this particular, mechanism or this subsystem. And it actually, you think of it that maybe you're going to be restricting the innovation that can happen with the community because you're cinching down the box and you're constricting on people's enthusiasm to produce and create. But a lot of times people actually seem to respond well to it in the community and be thankful for it because they start seeing the actual collaboration happen, because now people like working on projects where everybody feels unified and driven towards the same goal. So it's not that you necessarily need to say, you can't work on anything else right now, but you just at least start the suggestion of a tempo of, understand we need to do this before that, and then they, being hugely talented individuals, pick this up and run with it, and now you actually start producing usable goods and usable outcomes.
It's interesting though, you said, again, I would love to know if you guys believe, because what you basically said is you have to provide the community X to achieve Y, but I haven't heard anyone say like, flat out, communities, there's just certain things that communities cannot do. I mean, do you guys sincerely believe, generally a community can get to a goal as long as you put the right pieces in place? I mean, versus just things that companies internalize for themselves?
I understand that the limit of the community is related to the kind of people that is in it. Like, if you have a complex goal to achieve, you have to have very different kinds of people inside the community to develop that goal. But usually you don't have that variety of people inside the community. You have specialized people that shares the same values. So usually you can just achieve specific tasks through a community. So the limit for me is always related to the kind of people that you can engage in your community.
Yeah. I think also.
Go ahead.
So I was going to say, communities are amorphous. So if you need them to, click vote or like or something, then they're awesome.
Right.
But the more complex the task, the more you're asking of the community, the smaller that group needs to become. Groups are amazing at accomplishing incredibly complex things. Communities aren't. And if a great community is made up of lots of small groups who are working collaboratively together and are somehow connected to each other, so you have an openness that encourages participation from kind of all levels, then you probably got some
I agree with that, and I think we're all kind of saying the same thing. Like, you have to kind of give them somewhat, this not specific task, but something more tactical and tangible. I think if it's too open, too blue skies, I think it's kind of a mess, free for all kind of thing. But if you kind of, if you kind of zone in a little bit, it tends to work better.
Yeah, pose the question.
In our experience, and because our output is kind of advertising and creative, I would say, for example, and I'm dying to be wrong on this. But I would say that our community couldn't come up with like the next, let's say, priceless campaign for MasterCard that involves deep research, in this overall unified global campaign. But I think we could do very tactical things inside one idea. But having said that, I really want to be wrong about this.
I think if the areas of expertise of the people involved in a community is one limiting factor. I think the other limiting factor, which we've sort of been talking about, maybe more specifically, is the infrastructure, right? The platform, the levers, as you define them. How do you incentivize people? What tools and ways of organizing into smaller groups do they have at their disposal to actually get stuff done? What do the incentive structure look like? How easily can they connect? Imagine. Think about like the real world analogy of going with a group of people out to a restaurant, right? You come out of work or something, you don't know which restaurant you're going to go to, and you're with a group of 4 or 5 people, right? That's probably a good size between the 4 or 5 of you and your own knowledge of like good New York restaurants. You'll probably be able to come up with like a really awesome place. It's in the neighborhood, everyone can agree to it, and you'll go. Imagine trying to go out to a restaurant with a group of 100 people. Right, 100 people come out of work, and you have to somehow get to a restaurant. It'd probably be terrible. The average, aggregate intelligence of that mob of 100 people is probably incredibly low. whereas the aggregate intelligence of a group of 4 or 5 people is probably high, and probably even higher than just a group of like 1 or 2 people. But now, let's say you were to you really wanted to leverage that mob of 100 people. Well, maybe there was a leader, or there was some sort of plan of attack, there was some sort of infrastructure, a set of rules that people went into the mob with, and then said, okay, everyone break off into random groups or somehow semi-organized groups of 4 or 5 people, right? So you have 20, 25 individual groups. They all go out to different restaurants one night. So you're at 20 different restaurants. They report back. They figure out which restaurants were the best. They eventually narrow it down. You come up with like the top 2 or 5 restaurants, and then you've leveraged this entire network of 100 people in smaller groups to come up and sort of bubble up the best restaurant that you can all find.
It's a fantastic example, actually, and I think we're in such an important kind of phase right now as we start to all become aware of the importance of open technology, right? And what open technology and open communications, or whatever you want to call it, is providing us is the ability to seamlessly connect that small group with the mob. Because in the mob, you might actually have an individual who has an incredible amount to contribute to that small group. And as long as it's frictionless, and as long as it's open, it's easy for the interaction to take place. Right. But if we try to sort of operate in sort of silos based on the idea is that, well, you know what, 4 to 6 people is right, we've got it, we don't need any outside sort of help, right. Then we're not going to progress and we're not going to innovate. Right.
I think as humans, we're relatively good at just intuitively understanding how to get stuff done with a small group of people with us. We don't need much technology. We don't need a whole lot of infrastructure and rules and texture to that. We can just, it comes very naturally to us, right? But it's much harder for, I think, individuals or people to figure out, okay, how do I organize a group of 100 people? And that's where building technologies, building platforms, building infrastructures to help us do that, and to sort of get past get past the limits of our intuition. That's where stuff gets really interesting and powerful.
I'm actually going to just pause this there to just open it up for Q&A. Any questions out of the audience? We have one over there.
I'd like to address Ali's question earlier about how do you make sure that you're not missing the next priceless campaign, because one of the things that I'm curious about, my name is Christy, I work with Instructables, so one of the challenges for us is curating content and making sure that from the huge amounts of stuff that comes in, you do find all the good stuff and bring it up. And one of the things that I find very challenging when you don't necessarily have someone, we thankfully are small enough that we're able to view everything that comes in. But when you're talking about grand scale, how do you make sure that you're not missing something that is totally paradigm shifting, and maybe most of the people who are say upvoting or giving it a thumbs up or whatever the voting mechanism is, aren't dismissing it because it's coming out of left field and maybe it's going to be the next absolutely brilliant thing?
Oh, I think there is a lot of possibility for not missing it, because it's not kind of, especially on kind of creative work, because we're not working on the traditional one person, the creative director decides. I think doing it, uploading whatever you want gives you a lot of room to actually get something from left field. More so, actually, I would argue, than agencies, because we would have something, we'll see some, and it happened before. We had someone who wasn't on necessarily that discipline. So let's say it was a brief about writing a script, like an ad script. So someone who is actually a project manager wrote it, and that was something that. And was spotted actually by the community, and because they had nothing to like mark that people with, as opposed to like that was being like a pure good idea, that person bubbled up to the top, and because on a community like that, on a community like ours, you can't see a lot of like the baggage people have, so you don't know where ideas coming from and what they are doing. I think actually helps, and fortunately we are in a position where a project gets 100 ideas, that's still manageable for us to kind of look at everything.
That's a small number.
Yeah.
I'm really interested in when you start being massive scale.
Yeah.
And you start potentially losing the valuable pieces in the signal-to-noise ratio.
I have a question to sort of throw back at you. So we have a similar sort of challenge, not at the same scale as Instructables, but last week during Social Media Week, we hosted about 1,100 events in 12 different cities. Each individual event is like a pocket of just like potential ideas and inspiration and just something that could be really amazing that we probably won't see. And it's kind of frustrating. It's certainly frustrating for me not being able to kind of like know everything that's going on, but to a certain extent you have to relinquish that control. But my question to you is, why do you think it needs to bubble up to you? Like, why do you need to be the sort of the gatekeeper of what is or is not paradigm shifting, rather than allowing the community or building in like a sort of frictionless kind of architecture for the community to discover and make that determination?
Which is what happened, what I was trying to say is what kind of happened to us. Like what the community voted for was actually out left field, coming out of nowhere, and nobody expected it.
But well, Ali, I think you added another.
It depends on the structure of what you're talking about. One of the things that brought this to mind recently is Wikipedia is having problems with the idea of when history is reevaluated, right? And someone says, this actually happened. You know, I've just done the research. My book isn't out yet, but I want to go set the record straight on Wikipedia. It's a minority opinion, so it doesn't make the cut, right? So in that case, the structure of the community is such that you go with the mass wisdom of the crowd as opposed to what turns out to be a more educated view, and eventually it will catch up. Yes, but Wikipedia has hit that massive signal-to-noise ratio, and so they're starting to have that problem. I think that I and most of you are talking about relatively small communities, but that's one of the things that I'm specifically looking at for future of how do you make sure that you don't miss signals. And I don't necessarily mean me. I want to make sure that structurally I'm making it possible for people to find it, because surfacing is really hard.
I think that's a good example of the limits of just flat voting systems. Especially around larger communities, and especially with anything sort of like, say, I mean, the Wikipedia example is a good one. I think some things around creative, anything creative, having this very flat democratic structure where everyone has the same say. You have tons of people who are just have a terrible taste in design, right? Voting and making opinions, and then you have people who actually like know design well and are just more capable of making better creative decisions. They just get lost in the crowd.
I want to throw out just one, I don't know, possible, not solution, but just an idea to address the challenge. We're probably not going to have much of a chance to talk about it, but data is like so fundamentally important to being able to make good decisions, particularly as a community manager of any kind. Being able to access, understand, interpret real-time data as to what's happening is pretty critical. And I think that from our perspective, we measure like everything. It's sort of kind of ridiculous how much we try and measure, because the reason we do it is because we don't have control, and we're actually not where everything is happening. So we create all these data points, and the data points function as signals, and the signals are designed to tell us whether something is or is not working, or whether something is somehow catching fire and people are like really into that idea or that individual sort of piece of information that someone shared. And so trying to kind of build a sophisticated dashboard that allows us and our community react and respond in real time to something that is potentially of interest. And rather than us being the kind of, you know, sort of determining whether it gets shared or not, it's the community that makes that decision.
Yeah, there's sort of a question of scalability in what you're asking, obviously, because you're talking about like, well, we're the gatekeepers now, but what happens next? Because obviously we're sort of, you know, our community is outgrowing our own abilities to manage it. And what I want to do is connect it back to the concept that we talked about earlier of, you know, well, what is it a community can do? Well, it's all about who you aggregate in the community. And so one way to begin with how you are going to create your scalable evaluative mechanism would be to really break down fundamentally how you guys have been being the gatekeepers. Like, what are the mechanisms you guys use as gatekeepers currently, and then figure out, well, if I were to now try and characterize the people who excel in these particular mechanisms that make up my gatekeeper function.
Yeah.
And then how do I go about now attracting those? And then how do I go about giving them the tools to give the feedback that they need to give feedback to? And then furthermore, how do I track those individuals that I have now aggregated and keep them identified so that as I take in the mass input from my community, I am paying special attention, or if you want to get sort of specific and simple about it, maybe you're weighting those guys differently or weighting the input from those individuals differently. But that's what I would say is, like, most of the processes that people question, how do I handle doing this process with a bigger community? Usually you want to try and break it down and then integrate it into the community.
I think it goes back to the idea of like pros, you know, that I was kind of talking about a little bit before. If there's people that are very active and they've been there long enough and understand it, and actually a very high quality people, which not some wannabe person out of the street, for example, like you said. You know, there are a majority of people like they're really kind of high quality. Maybe these pros can gatekeep a little bit, you know, when you're scaling and when you're getting bigger.
Are there any other questions? Yeah.
I'm involved in a startup venture that's seeking to create a community, or develop a community from scratch, to eventually receive, to be a ready market for a groundbreaking technology platform. And it could take a year to a year and a half for that platform to be ready. And we're maybe thinking of teasing the community, speaking to influencers, starting to build the community without exposing too much about the idea in the early stages for various reasons. You've talked mostly about working with communities, but you've not really spoken very much about building them as a startup. So I'm interested in, what are the steps involved in that process? How would you recommend a company like mine? Maybe there are other people in the audience who might be wanting to build a community. What should we do?
Great question.
I'll throw out a very, very quick sort of methodology that we applied. Actually, Sean and I, and Saneel, and perhaps some other people in the room, Bastien, collaborated on a project a couple of years ago called the Beta Cup, which was looking to apply sort of open innovation, mass collaboration principles to redesigning the paper coffee cup. And what we did, starting from absolutely from scratch, was first of all, assemble a group of individuals that sort of had a shared passion in wanting to solve the problem. And in the first instance, that group consisted of about 15 or 20 people. Some had very domain-specific expertise, like in material science or sustainable design or whatever it might be, or some just like wanted to solve the problem out of their own personal frustration. And it's amazing what happens when you assemble a small group of people in terms of your ability to then reach a potentially larger group of people. And actually, Local Motors have done, we talked when I was down there a few months ago, we talked about the sort of the 1, 10, 100, 1,000 kind of formula of building community. So you start with one person, you assemble a group of 10, then you can easily reach a group of 100. You'll be just like in a heartbeat. Then as soon as you reach a group of 100, it's then easier to reach that group of 1,000. But it's all about starting, and you mentioned this, starting from the core, having a really strong core of passionate individuals. Working outwards from there will enable you to get to, a reasonable number that you could sort of define as a community. However, I strongly recommend that you do not engage any group of people beyond 10 with this idea of, we want you to help us to do something, but we're not going to tell you what it is. Because they're just immediately going to say, well, if you're not willing to be open, transparent, authentic, or whatever, for proprietary reasons, then why should we invest in something that you're not willing to be open about?
Yeah.
So I'd really that's something that you know, could be potentially an issue to overcome.
For me, I would just ask yourself, and it's going to sound fluffy, but I would just ask yourself, you know, in order for, I mean, Toby talked a more organized, somewhat process way of doing it, but I would say, ask yourself, the service or product that I'm creating with my startup, is that like really meeting an unmet need? Because I found that was an amazing way of growing organically, like starting something with 5 people that then became 20, that then became 50, you know, and then they went exponentially from that. And it might be that when you start and it doesn't grow, it might be that the answer is no, like I'm not meeting any unmet need here.
You mean an unmet need for the community?
Yeah, for the people out there. Why do you think, you know, like startups, like Facebook, you know, Pinterest, all these were businesses that were based on unmet needs. You know, like people being able to kind of, you know, upload their photos and be almost like pro photographers and create a community around that. There wasn't anything like that.
Yeah, it's really what's your engagement activity. You know, you got to have. You don't need to start out with that many, but you have to have that one engagement point where the community can take, or the community that you want to build, your sort of seed community, can take ownership of that. So I second the idea of you don't want to try. You'll have trouble if you try and bring them in and say, I'm not going to communicate with you what this overarching idea is. I'm going to kind of keep you on the periphery and tease them. Like, people want to come in and they want to be able to, the health is going to be letting them dive as deep as they possibly want to. You know, you don't want to put roadblocks in front of their participation in a sense.
And we're actually getting a signal. Try to leave these people with more time, and instead we've gone over. So I'm going to cut us off there. Everyone here gets 15 karma points. You can cash it out with Sean personally. So thank you guys very much. Appreciate it.
Thanks.